So now we're going to have a panel discussion from leaders from two companies that everybody watches, just like Salesforce, Google and OpenAI. And I wanted to introduce our moderator here, Sharon Olexy, who's going to be really taking us through discussion on a variety of topics related to AI. A little background on Sharon. She's a 20-year veteran of Silicon Valley, where she raised over $1 billion for emerging SaaS, consumer, and financial service companies. Currently, she's the founder and managing director of her own advisory firm, which is called Capital Exponent. It's dedicated to raising capital for founders and maximizing returns for their stakeholders. She's also on the board of Kueski, which is one of the largest buy now, pay later companies, and also provides online consumer lending in Mexico. Formerly, she was a CFO and COO of LendUp, which is a fintech company for the underbanked, creating over $1 billion in new credit opportunities for more than 50% of the population in the US that's been shut out of mainstream banking. She's worked in M&A, she's worked in joint ventures. She's going to provide a bit of context on David Sasaki and OpenAI, as well as Ganesh. Reminder, we'll be using Slido once again for questions, slido.com, event code Easton and the number 2, Easton and 2. Please join me in welcoming Sharon Olexy.
Thank you so much, Terry. Hey guys, can you hear me? Okay, yes, excellent. So good to see everybody there. Thank you so much for attending. So the last time that I moderated this panel, it was January of 2023, so 2 years ago, right? OpenAI had just launched ChatGPT just 60 days before the conference. And that launch was sort of described as the beginning of a Cambrian explosion of technology that's being driven by artificial intelligence. So, you know, I consider that a little bit dramatic, right? But witnessing what's happened just in the last couple of weeks, oh my God, it's like, holy Toledo, it's not so far from the truth, right? So what's different about this product, ChatGPT? It went from like 100 million active users 2 months after it launched. That is the fastest growing consumer app in history. Currently, I think it stands as number 2 on the iPhone. Number 1, we're probably going to touch on today if you guys are keeping up with the latest. But it's at 300 million active users, and that number is up 50% just from August. So the race is on, right? The race is on for the next 500 million users, and Google's CEO is telling folks that they're going to hit that number with Gemini by the end of this year. So if you think Google is late to the game, or if Google's not part of the game, let me assure you that you've been interacting with Google's AI tools probably as far back as 2001. So artificial intelligence, nothing new, right? That word is nothing new. Predictive algorithms have been sort of guiding and influencing the decisions we make for the last 30 years, right? From travel to weather to clothes to dating, you name it, right? So what's different now? So in my estimation, AI is red hot today because of 2 words. It's accessibility and ubiquity, right? Because in the past, these models were sort of cared for, created, tended to by what I call these high priests of incredibly smart people in these like cathedrals of academic institutions and research labs. But now today, these models that drive ChatGPT, they've matured to a point where everyone, everywhere, all at once, can can have a very interactive, natural conversation with this technology. That's really special. And in addition to that, it's sort of this paradigm shift from like retrieving data that already exists to actually creating this wholly original content of text, audio, and video just from your user prompts alone. This is amazing. But of course, it's not without its problems. You know, we'd be insane to not mention that. I have some statistics. 57% of users are wrestling with what's known as hallucinations. 43% report in organizations that they're struggling to prioritize what they're calling useful or impactful use cases. So the intelligence is there. Now the hard part is we have to take that on-demand intelligence and actually make something useful out of it instead of something that's just kind of novel, right? So that's why over the past year, I think you've been seeing the excitement shift to something that's very specific, and it's called AI agents. And so that's a system that can actually take action autonomously on your behalf. Now, think about that. It can take action autonomously on your behalf. Now, that's a major step up in capabilities for these systems. So now we're seeing another shift from AI as a conversational tool to AI as sort of becoming this active participant in our life. So for me, I think this is my prediction. 2025 is going to be the year of agents. And so let's see if my panelists are going to agree with me on this topic. So thank you so much. Let me welcome David Sasaki and Ganesh Shankar. Thank you. Thank you, guys. So I'm going to do my introductions, and these are incredibly impressive people, trust me. David Sasaki, he serves as the head of analytics at OpenAI, where he leads efforts to harness data-driven insights to inform product strategy and bring us one step closer to artificial general intelligence. Very interesting. The ability to match or surpass human cognitive capabilities. With over a decade of experience at the intersection of data science, product analytics, and leadership, David brings a wealth of experience in scaling teams, driving growth, and solving complex challenges. Before joining OpenAI, David was vice president of data science and product analytics at Meta, where he led a 300-person ads data science team. He received a bachelor's in cognitive science from UC Berkeley. We'll forgive you for that as well. Ganesh, yay, I love both these guys, is one of our newest Easton instructors teaching product management in tech companies. Yay, take that course. Currently, yay, let's do it. Hey, come on, give it up. This would be very interesting, by the way. Currently the director of product management for the content safety platform at Google, where he has over a decade of leadership experience. He leads a global product and engineering organization to scale online safety with AI, never boring. Prior to that, he was a group product manager for corporate engineering, developing core productivity applications and driving cost savings. Before that, he served as product lead for social impact and for Google Drive Mobile. Before joining Google, Ganesh was in the education startup space. So that might be a very interesting use case to talk about, and co-founded an e-learning startup called Study Socket. He received both his bachelor's in electrical engineering and his master's in biomedical engineering from the University of New South Wales. So let's give a warm welcome to David and Ganesh. Thank you. We really appreciate your time. Thank you, guys. Yeah, we really appreciate your time. So I'm going to jump right into it. Nothing scandalous, I promise. So we've seen this, we will touch on it. We're going to touch on it. We've seen the evolution from chatbots, which are conversational, to co-pilots, which are really like working alongside us to complete a task, like an assistant. And now we're talking about agents, which is autonomously executing upon tasks to achieve a goal. So my question has this evolution translated into new use cases that you, David and Shankar, are developing for specific use cases. How has moving from conversational to task-driven change the nature of the product and services as we know them? Nothing profound.
I mean, I guess I can start, and I think like we said this when we chatted before. I actually really hate the word agent. And in general, I think this field has a lot of these like high level buzzwords that I really like what Marianne was saying about really getting to the details of like, what is the use case that's happening? What are people actually using this for? And so I think for agents, the one that now I think both Google and OpenAI have something out there is this sort of web use agent, which is the ability to, right now in ChatGPT, you type something in, it gives you a text-based answer back. Now you can have the ability to ask it to go do something on your behalf out on the open web. And it's early, it's very much, I would call it a beta, but I do think that's sort of like the early stages of a thing that you can ask to go do something, and it will go do that in a pretty unconstrained environment. And I think we're starting with the web. That's sort of, I think, the easiest place to start in many ways, and there's a lot of value there. But I think like that's kind of a clear use case where you can imagine, rather than you going through and booking your flight down to LA that I did a couple of days ago, you just say, hey, I need to be at this conference. Can you go book the flight? It has your information about your flight preferences, your hotel preferences. It just does it. Maybe it confirms it along the way. And it's basically able to do that already.
And that's Operator, right?
That's right.
David, you guys had just released that, and poo-poo on DeepSeek for stealing all the glory, but you guys just released Operator. And could you tell us how it's doing it? It's looking at the web page, analyzing the pixels, and then executing on that, correct?
Right. I mean, it kind of uses the computer just like a human does in many ways.
Yeah.
And it kind of learns in the same way that we train these models to learn about human text and respond in very human-like responses with human text. In the same way, looking at how humans interact with the computer, looking at where the buttons are, looking at all these things, and it learns, okay, if I want to go do this thing, I need to click this button, and then I need to change this filter. And so it's a very similar paradigm.
And so why did you choose that particular interface to tackle first, the web browser?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two factors to it. One is, I said already, it's kind of the easiest place to start in some ways. Like I think a lot of the challenges that are going to create friction for AI having the level of impact in the world that I think we all hope for is a lot of the places where it needs to touch the physical world are just really, really hard. How does it get the input to do that? How does it have the controls to do things out in the physical world? All that's super, super hard. And so having this unconstrained environment with the web, but it's fully digital, is a lot easier place to start kind of seeing how you can get AI to operate in that kind of environment. And then the second thing is there's some pretty clear value propositions there for users, like the one I just said. And so I think it's the combination of those two things that's the right place to start.
And Ganesh, I can imagine as a proponent of online safety, how do you think through these types of access points?
Yeah, look, David gave a great answer about consumer experiences with agents. I'm also particularly excited about agents in the enterprise. And I think that that's a big area where when you think about how people work in the enterprise, there's a lot of like companies and the employees are somewhat aligned and encapsulated, right? Companies want people to do a thing. The employees want to do the thing too, which are normally frustrated by, not interoperability between your tooling, not interoperability between your data. And so typically in enterprise, you see like people even become part of the machine where they're trying to transform information, take unstructured information, make it structured, move it between tools, move it between processes, move it between people. And so LLMs already offer a lot of capabilities there, right? They've allowed us to do multimodality, transformation of information, summarization, and then agents actually are kind of like the next step where you start automating some of these workflows. So
is that called ontology? Is that layer on top where it's the business layer, the work process layer?
I don't think of it in terms of but, I think of it in terms of like work processes, people actually like working together to get a task done across different fields. Yeah,
I like that.
So when we think about agents in the workforce and, in the safety space, we're also experimenting with agents too. what you can do is you can have a pretty good understanding of what the task is you want to accomplish.
Yeah.
But you don't need to redesign all the interfaces that people use, right? They use human interfaces. And so there's a lot of automation you can do now that you couldn't do before because it would be very expensive before. And then agents also, they're not a one-way ticket, right? You don't have an agent just go out and do the entire job. Even in the demos that have been shared recently, agents come back, ask for clarification. And there's also checkpoints where you want people to be in control and make decisions at really important points. And think enterprise use cases are well designed for that, right? Because there's already kind of handoffs between people. There's normally like a way to, look at a launch before you commit to it. So I think like that's one of the areas where I see a lot of furious work on agents. Even trying to be customer zero, I think Marianne just described it as that. Trying to use agents yourself to make it better. And the browser is a great place to start because we do a lot of our work in the browser across the tools today.
Well, we touched on this before, but it's sort of a simplistic view of the AI stack. It's like the hardware layer where you've got the chips and the power. There are constraints there. There's the model layer, which is sort of the brain. We're seeing that become commoditized. We'll talk about DeepSeek. And then there's the application layer, which is I see it as the product layer. And Alex Karp from Palantir said that's where he thinks the value is going to accrue. So how do you as product leaders innovate and build use cases on top of I call it these ever shifting sands? Like how do you it changed this morning when I opened up my phone. So how do you guys deal with this constant shifting landscape?
Let me take first pass.
Go for it.
Give you a second pass. Yeah, okay. First off, right? Everything is moving really quickly. We are in a transformative state with technology, but at the same time, it's going to be okay, right? Take a breath, and rely on your kind of product and business fundamentals, and a little bit of what you need to do as a product leader. And what we do with our teams is, we start thinking about, what has changed in our mission as an organization and our vision. And typically these things tend to be evergreen, right? The kinds of things you're trying to do, why your organization exists, the kinds of value you're trying to create. Typically it's the same, but the how is changing, right? And very quickly. And so, AI techniques, agents, they are capabilities, they're new capabilities, but you also still have access to all the old capabilities. And so what you need to do is kind of reflect on how these new capabilities emerge in your business, right? And
how you're connecting.
To give you a real example from my team, we're a content safety platform infrastructure team. So we basically have to actually provide safety classification for all products at Google. And we started seeing a shift, right? Pretty much all products at Google are trying to incorporate AI and agents into their workflows. So suddenly we have to go from the old world of providing safety for user-generated content to the new world of providing safety for still user-generated content, the core business, but also co-created content with AI created by Google's AI, and then co-created content by AI created by other people's AI. And so that kind of has broadened the spectrum, but the mission and the vision of our team is the same.
That's the key.
So we start thinking about the different layers. I think you mentioned them. We definitely try and embed safety into the model development itself. And we are a safety team, we're experts in safety. So we kind of look at our knowledge. We go work with Google DeepMind. We try and incorporate data into what they're doing to develop new models. But we work at the other layers too. We have to work at the infrastructure layer. We have to actually work at the agentic layer and make sure that agents don't create new challenges and new risks. And then ultimately, any safety team will tell you this. Safety is not a guarantee. The ultimate safest product you have is the one you don't build with no users. So there's always going to be some mistakes that happen. So you have to actually get ahead of that, and you have to have really good feedback loops into understanding the world, what people are using and misusing the technology for, and then incorporating that into the system itself. You asked about hardware. We do think about hardware because we deploy safety tech in both our infrastructure, third-party infrastructure, so say via Google Cloud for customers, and then also mobile infrastructure, say an LLM running on a device or an agent running on a device, and we have to put safety at the device level too. There you have to think about constraints, right? What does the device allow you to do? What does the infrastructure allow you to do? But ultimately, you're building capabilities that are similar, but they take into account the constraints of the hardware, and then they evolve as you go. The hardest thing, which I'm sure folks have talked about already, is that the technology is changing really fast. And for normal infrastructure teams, we think in terms of years of building things out and migrating customers and onboarding customers. And one of the things we've had to do is kind of break that mental mold and say, let's think in terms of maximum timeline of 6 months. And even that's long. And so
crazy.
either you're building something you need to commit to getting out the door
Yeah.
within 6 months, it's really hard for an infrastructure team, or you're building something that you know the technology landscape is going to change in 6 months, and you have to actually make it composable so you can adapt and incorporate the latest techniques into what you're building as you go.
Well, it's interesting because Google, by the way, is almost fully vertically integrated, right? They have chips, they have cloud, they have models, and you of course have the distribution and the products to do that in. OpenAI has a slightly different configuration. Love to hear what you think, David, about where the value is and how you're creating use cases within that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I'd say is this is kind of the fun part. I mean, business and building products supposed to be fun. And the fact that who knows what this all plays out is, to me, the really, really exciting thing. Like why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Frankly, I feel like having been at Meta for 10 years, it was getting a little bit boring of it's like you kind of knew what the shape of things looked like. You kind of knew where things were going. And this one, who knows? So I think that's really exciting. And so I don't think anyone really knows where the value is going to accrue in this space. I think, I do think there's certainly an argument to be made for usually with new technology, there's a lot of value in vertical integration and that, in particular between the model and application layer, there's a lot of things that we're able to do that would be very difficult if you own just one part of that stack. Obviously, we don't have as much integration on the hardware layer, although we're doing a bunch of stuff with inference and obviously have a big announcement recently on that. So I think it's kind of who knows. I think the way I think about this is because this technology is so new and because it's very uncertain how this all plays out, there's a lot of value in trying different things and seeing how it works and seeing what resonates with customers. Because there's not going to be any central authority that's going to be, this is the way it's going to work and perfectly predict the next decade of this. And so I think we can learn the most from putting different products out there, trying different things. And it's part of what informs our kind of iterative deployment strategy at OpenAI is we want to see what actual real people do with our products when we put them out there. And we always learn a huge amount that we didn't expect. So I think that's kind of the strategy I think about when it's so uncertain.
I love that strategy because it's very much product discovery versus product management. You're constantly running, testing, tests, getting information and incorporating it back into your learning. So, of course, it wouldn't be a conference without mentioning DeepSeek. It's we can't not mention it. So Mark Andreessen, who loves to be a little dramatic too, calls DeepSeek our Sputnik moment, right? So relative to sort of this landscape of competition and its impact on, I would say, customer offerings, will we see a broader proliferation of use cases due to these lower cost, I say open source, but I also mentioned to you it's more open weights models. And if so, what areas might these arise for these lower cost open source models?
Yeah, I think... my view on this is probably the most competitive space and technology in history, just in terms of the billions and trillions of dollars, the level of investment and resources flowing into it. And so my expectation is there will be an insane amount of competitors from every direction and every angle. And so that is just, whether it's DeepSeek or some other competitor in 6 months that we weren't expecting, that's my expectation generally with the space. I do think it's a really, really good thing to drive the costs down for inference on these models. I think that's going to be one of the most critical things. We were talking about Operator, this agent that can go use the web. One of the reasons we can only offer it on our kind of most expensive tier right now is it's frankly just pretty expensive.
Right.
It costs a lot to run that thing. It's sort of the first version, and usually these first versions are really expensive. And so it's really clear that the roadmap there is how do we dramatically drive down the costs such that everyone can use this for just their day-to-day, web usage, basically. And so I think they've done a bunch of really cool stuff with their model that has helped reduce that cost. And I think that's a good thing for the industry in general.
And Ganesh, I bet you this will go to your point. It's some instances, closed models are probably appropriate, and open source is probably appropriate for other situations. Love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so totally agree with what you're saying. I think we're in a hyper competitive market, and it's actually really great, right? It's driving innovation. Like by the time we finish talking today, there'll probably be something else out in the market that is like even more advanced. It's happening at that pace, right? And there are different reasons, as if you're thinking with a product mindset on, there are different reasons you might want to use a proprietary model, or maybe more as a service, or an open weights, open source model. Maybe you want to actually like tune the model yourself, or maybe you want to actually have like more flexibility or understand more deeply how it works. Or maybe you want to inherit some capabilities, like even some of the stuff maybe my team does, that's like some of the safety guardrails, and you don't want to have to go and build that yourself because it kind of comes when you use a proprietary model. But one of the things I think is one of the most interesting trends is models becoming smaller and cheaper, because really amazing things happen when technology becomes ubiquitous and really, really affordable. And so we're already seeing like models running on high-end phones today, but soon maybe lower-end devices too. And when you think about technology trends in the past, when we first had connectivity, your mobile data plan was really expensive, or like early mobile phones are, well, they're pretty low powered now, but back then they were really high powered, expensive devices, and you could experiment with them. But like knowing that you could have an LLM or a agent in everyone's pocket running on their phone opens up a lot of new avenues. So low cost models running on device actually allow you to do things with a much higher level of privacy, for example. It acts more as an agent working on your behalf, as opposed to having running in the cloud, which is still beneficial from a power perspective. So I think you want that whole spread of options. And if the industry is driving to that direction, it's really exciting. Like one of the projects we were working on, we're just using not agents, but LLMs in content classification. One of the things that happened is while we were working on this project, during the 3 months we were developing some of this technology, the throughput of our model improved by 5x. And so we already thought this was a really good idea. We were doing it because it was a great return on investment. And then suddenly there was an incredible return on investment. And I've not seen things move that fast before. It's really exciting. So I think that trend is actually a really good thing.
I think actually on that point too, like I actually think that's like a really important trend in general as you think about building on top of these applications that you were saying, is like the rate of improvement is like unbelievable. Even within, it's like really, really hard to kind of wrap your head around how quickly some of these things are improving. And so as you're building applications on top of it, I think it's important to kind of start with that as a first principle understanding of what's happening. Because if you're building for that specific, the model has this capability and will never improve from there, by the time you're done building it, you will already be kind of leapfrogged by the new model that can do that 10 times better. But if you build with the idea, this is just going to keep getting better, and how do I build my application to leverage the fact that this is just going to keep getting better and cheaper, then you'll be in a much better state.
Well, I think it's interesting because we talked about it backstage that DeepSeek actually made this leap because they had constraints. It's sort of like, scarcity creates innovation. So they were sitting on a bunch of H800 GPUs, and they couldn't use H100s, technically speaking. And they had to innovate around that in order to make the model work. So I think that's really interesting about whether or not anyone can truly own AI. We sort of touched on that one. So stick a pin in that one, because I'm not sure anyone can kind of own AI, or any one country or person. So I have an interesting quote, because I love this quote when I ran across it. It said, "Language models are statistical slot machines." I love that. I love that quote. Statistical slot machines. As long as LLMs are probabilistic, there's an element of chance in what they produce, which I think is kind of interesting. In the past, you punch a button on the tool, it spits out the same answer, right? This is not the case. The takeaway, it's all hallucination, but we only call it that when we notice it's wrong. So I thought that was funny. It's only a hallucination if it gave you the wrong answer. So I thought this was interesting. Like, how do you think about the customer experience and building trust when, like, the very nature of what you build upon, models, is probabilistic and not deterministic? How do you control? Will reliability and hallucinations be an even bigger issue if we're going to turn AI into autonomous agents?
I love this. Your quote.
No, please. I was like, I love this quote.
It's so okay. Think about it as capabilities, right? This is where I'll always go back to. There are deterministic automation capabilities, and now we have this kind of non-deterministic capability too.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about it as like, hey, I want a better level of automation, maybe AI and agents and the way we have them today aren't the best use for your use case. Like think about all of the options there. You should always look at all of the tools in your toolbox. But at the same time, my mental model for what we're trying to do with AI and how we think about it is actually to think about it as a coworker or a human that you've hired. Humans are non-deterministic too, right? You hire a human onto your team and you work with them. Initially, you have to kind of like train them on the job. Maybe they'll have the skills that you want. They'll get better over time. Give them feedback. Maybe they're having a bad day and they just do something that's not quite right. And so I think like this is key to building trust with using AI, with your use cases, with your users, with your customers. You have to actually have a few things, right? Your trust with humans comes from frequency of interaction, doing things in your interests, even if not exactly the way you would do it. And then the ability to give feedback and have that responded to. So I think when we're building with these models, we want to think about creating user journeys and use cases where you have that ability. So you actually have a concept of what you want to achieve, guardrails to stop you not achieving things that may be dangerous or you don't want to do. And then the ability to kind of refine the model over time and give it feedback and make it more customized to your needs.
I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I love the analogy to humans. Like, we're actually super used to dealing with non-deterministic things.
So great.
And we have a whole lot of things that have worked really well to kind of get the best outcomes out of that. And so, I mean, I think what will end up happening is, I mean, technically we'll reduce hallucinations over time, but it's not going to go to zero. It'll still be non-deterministic. And so I think a lot of just the processes and structures within companies and within society will start to adapt to that. And like, you know, within a company, when you're an engineer building software, you make a bunch of mistakes, but we have a bunch of processes that reduce and minimize that. You have someone else review it. You have tests that try to catch that before it goes to production. You have various ways to sort of minimize the impact of those mistakes. And those are the kinds of things, you know, we'll move from this place where we're, you know, we were talking about moving data in this really brittle way before, and maybe agents can kind of get in between that. And so you're making some trade-offs there between you have this very brittle but very deterministic system, and now you'll have a much smoother, can plug into basically arbitrary things, but maybe make some mistakes sometimes. Probably that's going to end up being net the better end state, especially if we figure out what are the checks and balances we put into that system so that it kind of reduces the cost of those mistakes.
And you know, I'm getting the light over there, but I want to get one more in really quickly. With every product you develop, you have to consider bad intent, like bad actors, privacy, deep fakes, jailbreaking. How do you design products to prevent bad actors or bad intent? How do you think about incorporating guardrails into your process?
Okay. Look, it's the unfortunate reality of the world we live in that like technology can be used for good or harm, any technology. And so normally when you're building technology, I think there's a responsibility to think about how you build technology to optimize for the good or intended use cases and minimize the unintended or harmful use cases. And this starts way before you go and build something, right? It starts with principles as an organization. And actually, I think pretty much every AI organization out there talks about their safety principles, responsibility, AI principles, because people are thinking a lot about what happens with technology as it gets more and more powerful. And then you use those principles to actually, as you design the technology, incorporate, different types of safety at every level, right? I think I described this before. There's safety at the model level with how we pre-train data, how we safety fine-tune it, how we evaluate models for safety, how we actually do what's called red team adversarial testing and try and breaking models. And then after models get released into production, there's guardrails on them. There's feedback loops that feed back into every one of these layers and make them better. But again, every safety team will tell you it's not a guarantee. And so you have to also incorporate what's new, what things you haven't anticipated, new types of threats and vulnerabilities, and then try and like work around that and feedback as quickly as possible. So it's kind of an entire system built around the framework of developing.
And David, before we run out of time, I really do want to get both of your recommendations. Like, what is your parting advice for everyone in this room for excelling in this brave new world? Skills, processes, experience. What would you guys recommend?
I actually really liked, I think these are like the UCLA Anderson School principles or something like that Terry mentioned at the end of his talk. I actually think those are really good, things like adaptability and whatnot. The only one that I would maybe add is I actually find this kind of moment really helpful to study history, especially technology history. Like, I think the things I've been spending a lot of time thinking about is the development of the mainframe, the rollout of telephone and electricity, and like what happened in those periods and how did that play out. And I think there's a lot to learn about just like the market forces there and the competitive dynamics and what ended up happening that aren't going to map perfectly here, but I think are more helpful than kind of like studying like recent business history on a bunch of like specific things that I think are maybe less applicable.
Ganesh, did you have parting words?
Yeah, I think approach this time with a growth mindset and curiosity, right? Yeah. With my team, I think Marianne mentioned this earlier. Sometimes you have a team and you want to up-level them into a new technology paradigm. And so about a couple of years ago, we had this moment where we were like, hey, everyone needs to actually go learn how LLMs work and a bit of like how to actually use this technology. And, when we talked to the room of my team, we were split about 50-50, AI skeptics and AI true believers. And that's actually very healthy in an organization because you want people to test both sides of either let's actually find a way to make this technology successful or let's find an alternative that's actually also going to be successful. But both sides have to learn about technology. So we asked them to actually go and like educate themselves, try it out, try use cases, work together, try and prove or disprove when you would use the technology. So I think the same mindset you should adopt. Go experiment, learn about the different models, play around with them, play around with use cases for yourself, and just get some experience so you actually know when you can and should use it.
So do I have time for a lightning round? Okay, great. So I love the lightning round because this is when we get to put them on the spot. So I'm going to throw a statement out and you guys give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down and tell me why as quickly as possible.
Got it.
So will AI find a cure for all diseases within the next 5 years? I mean, that was from Sam Altman. That book was from Sam Altman. So
Sam is one of the most ambitious people I've ever.
Okay.
I think it's the timeline thing as opposed to the.
Yeah, I think it's the timeline. That's a sequencing thing. Yeah. So I thought this was it. I came up with this one last night. If every child has an AI teacher from birth that can personalize or tailor their education, could everyone potentially be a PhD?
I don't know if that had a thumbs up or thumbs down, but I have a huge positive belief about the impact of AI in personalized education. I don't know what the value of a PhD is in 10 years, to be honest.
We didn't start that.
Take it out of recording.
Take that out of the...
Could I add a thought there?
Yes, please.
I do think AI can supercharge education. One of the things I'm super interested about is there's a concept called deliberative alignment, where instead of working with one AI model, you can possibly work with multiple models that have different perspectives and then go and come to consensus or decide and like up-level your knowledge based on these really nuanced topics. So it's not, I don't know if that's a PhD, but it is actually something that could really up-level human knowledge and how we think and make decisions, even as professionals. So
I love that idea. So will Minority Report actually happen?
Can I do a sideways though?
Yeah, something in between.
I work in safety, so I'm very paranoid, right? I always think about what's the worst thing that could possibly happen. And so, but on the positive side, I'd say if you have an organization and you have principles on how you will use technology and the downsides of bias in technology and the downsides of even basic automation in technology, when you get that wrong, then you're going to stay on the right track. Will someone try and do it in a misguided way? I don't think we can control for that. So that's why it's science.
Well, we're glad he's working on it, right? We're glad he's working on it. I had one last on the lightning round. With AI's potential for climate modeling, I thought this was interesting. Is it possible for us to never have a climate disaster again, meaning to get caught off guard or surprised by like earthquakes, tornadoes, or hurricanes? I thought of some good ones last night.
Yeah, you did.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I feel
it's interesting.
I don't know enough about climate to sort of feel strongly on it. I think a lot of this just comes down to like inherent of access to data and then inherent predictability of things. And like, I don't know well enough how, if you had perfect data, could you predict these things? I think if the data was there, then I think it's possible.
You are a data scientist, so I'm going to.
I think they've made a model of like the 3D world.
They've done floods and they've done weather prediction, but I mean, we're going to have to do a lot more to tackle climate change and just model climate disasters. So
it's always going to be a little, the world is always going to be a little unpredictable, is what you're saying. Okay, awesome. We have time. Well, I'm getting the word to hit some questions here. I love when it says anonymous. Start out.
Spicy ones.
I know. Or maybe I should do Sean. Sean was brave enough to put his name on this. How do you see the shift of humans with AI replacing those without it impacting less tax savvy or disadvantaged individuals?
So this is about using AI automation and potentially displacing humans in the workforce. Is that correct?
I think so. I think that's what they're trying to get to.
I think maybe this is where I'll refer a little bit to what David said earlier. Like if you look at how like technology and automation has deployed in the world in the past, there is definitely some jobs displacement, but there's also a lot of jobs creation.
Yeah.
One of the things I am excited about, like with this form of technology, is the ability to work with it almost like another person. Actually means that it's very accessible for people who may not have been good at using other kinds of technology tools before. So I actually think there's like a whole undiscovered yet set of roles and ways we can work with this technology to up-level our impact. I think Marianne said, it's not replacing people, but it's like up-leveling their impact. I see that in the way we've applied AI at work. It's actually like we can scale to do so much more than we could have hired that experienced people before. So it is a really important question. I think we as a world need to think about it. I'm not going to try and devalue that. But I think like we're going to actually create a lot of jobs and we're going to create a lot of potential for people who work with technology that couldn't before.
Well, there's a great article by Ben Thompson. He writes an article called Strategery. So if you guys have ever, please check it out. He wrote an amazing article on this topic. He was saying that really AI will be adopted. It will be harder for an organization that exists today to change their processes and maybe absorb AI unless you are an AI you're starting out today, that you're an AI native. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So maybe the talk of eliminating people is a little overblown at this point.
I think it's also probably one of the most democratized technologies. Like, when you kind of look at historically the rollouts of these technologies, they tend to start with extremely rich, extremely limited access. And this is one that hundreds of millions of people are already using and have access to for free. And so I do think that there's definitely going to be downsides and challenges, but I think that's like a little bit of a different dynamic for this technology than we've seen in prior shifts.
Excellent. Okay, I got some more. So there's a significant debate in agent solutions, single agent or multi-agent systems. Which do you think is more powerful and why? I like that one. That's interesting. Because if you think of one agent, but then you have a lot of agents working together, it forms almost like a neural network. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting.
I'm thinking about it.
It's really interesting.
Is it agents working with other agents, or is it?
Yeah, single agent or a multi-agent system, which I think is kind of interesting.
I mean, my answer's not very good, which is like I don't know. But I think that like it's. I think we will, not we OpenAI, but we as a society and technology industry will test a bunch of these things. And I think we'll have to see, again, which of these things leads to better outcomes. I don't think we know or could know right now how that's going to play out.
Yeah, the solution space is still not complete here, right? Things are moving quickly and we're developing new techniques as we go. So I would say in that kind of uncertainty, fall back on, shout out to, of course, product discovery principles, right? And really think about like, what are you trying to do will actually impact the technology choice you make, right? And so you have to understand, you can still research what users need. You can still kind of use techniques like user journey mapping and metrics to define like what you're trying to achieve. You can actually build out UIs and test things. And then ultimately you make a technology choice that empowers that. But if you start your journey by saying, oh, which technology is better, you're already locking yourself into some decisions that actually maybe you don't want to use agents at all, right? So there's actually some fundamentals that don't change even if you're working with AI. And then, single or multi-agent, as David said, we don't know right now. We'll probably learn there'll be something even new in the future that might be better than both of those things.
Well, these are really great questions, by the way. They've got one that said for Ganesh, what are your thoughts on the safety of navigation apps prompting drivers with questions like, is there still an obstacle here while driving? Now, we did make the distinction in like, there's kind of two layers of agents where it's just like software driven, like it's digital. Those seem to be an area where it's, more palatable or easy to, apply agents to that. But when you talk about the real world embedded, that's a much trickier situation. So love to hear, because you're with Google and OpenAI. You guys are definitely thinking about robots.
Yeah, look, difficult question. I think with every safety decision is a trade-off, right? A trade-off between safety and privacy, a trade-off between maybe a safety outcome for that one person getting the prompt versus the other people who might run into an accident, right? So there's always a bunch of trade-offs you're making as a product manager. I have to be very honest that I'm not a Google Maps PM. So normally we as a safety team provide capabilities to the product teams who are developing the ultimate product experience. And there's some decision-making and trade-offs between the two. I will say driving and having even people or automated vehicles in the world is really hard. This is why self-driving cars were on the horizon for every year for multiple years, but now you can catch a Waymo around LA and it's actually a pretty great experience. But people are thinking about this, moving automation from the digital world to the physical world is very difficult because it's actually really hard to model. And so you have to actually, take a lot of input and make decisions in real time. So I would say there's never a perfect solution for all the users and all the different interactions you can have. You're trying to find a balance.
And David, this might be how you guys prioritize as well. There's some use cases where there's 0% acceptability of a negative outcome, right? And that's like running over a person, right? Yeah. Or not performing the surgery well. These aren't areas probably where AI should be happen autonomously right now.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between some of these really, really bad outcomes or existential type A risks versus the kind of risks that Ganesh was talking about earlier, which are a little bit more in the ballpark of the types of risks that we've dealt with historically with social media or search or that sort of thing. And I just think there's different ways to look at those trade-offs. I do think there's still autonomous vehicles, I think, is a good example where I don't know how many deaths, for example, have happened on the basis of autonomous vehicles. I think it's non-zero. And I think it will be non-zero because it's going to be impossible for that to be completely zero. But on a kind of per miles driven basis, it's much, 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 much lower than human drivers. Yeah. And I think we need to be thinking about things in those terms as well, because what's sort of net better for society, it's not just an absolute threshold.
Well, and the last statement on that is ideal in the finance world, right? Where everything is binary, zeros and ones basically is what money is today. But an autonomous agent perhaps sending $1 billion to some bank account across the seas is not really a palatable issue either. So even in the digital world, I think we still have some use cases that we are still thinking through.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I think that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. David, thank you. Ganesh, you guys are amazing.